how autonomous organizations use DeFi to govern real-world assets. The dream of DAOs is the ability for a crowd to manage an entity. How can a DAO bridge on-chain events with off-chain assets? What is the importance of oracles in creating this off-chain and on-chain bridge? This panel is moderated by Scott Lewis of DeFi Pulse, which he's going to be a great resource of keeping track of all things DeFi. Scott?
I'm here with a foursome of builders in the space. And we're going to be talking about kind of bridging real-world assets onto blockchains. It's pretty cool because it kind of greatly expands the total addressable market of the space. And I guess without further ado, we'll kind of get everyone to just introduce your protocol and kind of just let us know what problem you're trying to solve. Maybe first, if Ray from Curio Invest, if you want to kind of give us a breakdown, what you're doing right now.
Thank you, Scott, for the invitation. I'm very pleased to share more about Curio, what we're doing as a tokenization, and introduce it today. Curio is a Swiss-based project launched about 2 years ago. We're working on a very exciting topic called asset tokenization of real-world hard assets with focus on collectibles. We're starting with rare collectible cars. These are not the typical assets and vehicles you see on the street, but rather those ultra rare collectibles, maybe some classic or even hyper limited edition cars that have some provenance. And what we're doing is wrapping it in a legal setup that enables us to tokenize it under the European Liechtenstein law, and in that way protect the investors' rights and give them for the first chance access to this asset class. And around this topic, we're introducing this DAO concept in which we bridge that gap between the screening, the scouting, and the selection of these collectibles and the tokenization of real-world assets. So I'll be happy to share more information, more content about that throughout this chat. And yeah, very excited to hear about other projects here today.
Cool. That sounds interesting. And we also on the panel we have Melanie from WOM Protocol. If you could explain a little bit about what you're building and what problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah. So thanks for having me. Hello from Berlin. I'm Melanie, founder of WOM Protocol, and we're scaling an entire ecosystem to help creators, platforms, and brands to monetize word-of-mouth content. Word-of-mouth content is the content known as authentic product recommendations from real brand lovers. Why are we doing this? It's because we have seen, I think, over decades, a misalignment of interest in the marketing and advertising space, where you have a lot of platforms that need to get everything out of the advertiser and all the information, and of course have incentives to increase content, advertising content on their platforms to monetize content that no one really wants to see anymore. I think everyone knows to press the skip button on YouTube. No one really wants to see ads anymore. And that's where we believe we have created a solution for advertisers to market to new customers through authentic word-of-mouth recommendations. And these are recommendations everyone is already doing 2.1 billion times a day. People are doing it on all sorts of social networks. So we said, why not helping these people to monetize with it?
Cool. That's interesting. Yeah, and then we have Ryan Berkun from Teller.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me on here. Really excited to share some of our work and talk about Chainlink. Give some bump into that. So at Teller, we are an open source credit risk protocol. We create money markets where pretty much users can earn interest on deposits, or they can connect their credit history from the real world to borrow in DeFi without credit. So the real problem that we're solving is lowering the barriers of entry for new users to enter the DeFi space by utilizing what is your actual credit history, that from transactions in your bank account all the way to actual credit scores here in the States, and really replacing that as the collateral needed in DeFi.
Cool. So how it can you explain maybe for the audience how that would be different than like a Compound or an Aave?
Yeah, so we see Compound and Aave as focusing on the risk-free rate in DeFi. They're over-collateralized lending platforms and protocols that have enabled this actual movement of money. What we're looking at is the ability to connect your bank account or connect your credit info, where we have actual risk assessments that happen off-chain in almost like a layer 2 environment. And that risk assessment is brought into the loans that a borrower can receive, whether that's the interest that it affects, the minimum collateral needed, and really we have the ability to perceive this as a slider, where based on the data that the borrower provides, they can go all the way down to having no collateral and really increasing the capital efficiency in what they can take out.
All right, cool. Yeah, maybe we could move to Greg from DMM. Could you explain a little bit about what DMM it is and kind of what problem it's solving?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, DMM or DeFi money market basically is solving a pretty simple problem. Actually, it's just returning yield to kind of the global economy. And the way we do it is actually pretty simple. So you can get 6.25% off your currently Ether, USDC, USDT, DAI, and we are just actually OKX just proposed to the DAO, the DMM DAO, to list their stablecoin as well. And what you're able to do is just swap in and earn 6.25%. The interesting thing is our main goal is to provide very stable, uncorrelated yield. So as we all know, a lot of the DeFi interest rates kind of bounce around a lot. The DMM protocol is really about providing this stable, uncorrelated yield at 6.25% for crypto holders. And the way we do it basically is by taking real world assets and bringing them on chain. We use Chainlink oracles for all of this. And what we basically let you do, we let you see the actually underlying assets backing the entire ecosystem. And then these assets need to be physical real world assets. They need to have three basic criteria. One is we must have a first lien senior secured position on them, which basically means if something goes wrong, we have the right to recover those assets. And then secondarily, it must be over collateralized on an income production basis. So while we pay 6.25%, we generate anywhere from 8 to 11% off the assets. And third, the actual collateral has to be over collateralized. And so the protocol itself, DMM, provides 6.25%, and the DAO is governed by DMG tokens, and they have the right to govern the ecosystem. But also, as you probably heard, there's an extra portion of interest being accrued, and they can decide what happens with that. So in a couple of weeks, we'll probably be burning the first round of tokens. So it's really about providing this stable, uncorrelated yield using real world assets in combination with crypto.
Cool. Yeah, what all is the DAO considering food coins at all? Or is it farming within the purview of the DAO?
So the DAO actually decides pretty much everything, right? So we did the first test case basically with autos, basically a pool of autos. We actually have that will be probably posted for consideration shortly. We've already told the community aviation. So I believe we were the first people with Chainlink to actually tokenize an auto pool. I think we'll be probably the first with Chainlink on the aviation asset as well. But anybody actually can introduce assets, and there's a basic structure that allows folks, you must have a certain amount of ownership of DMG to introduce assets, so you have something at risk. But yeah, the idea is that any real world asset that fits into this framework of those three main points I told you, people can introduce and generate yield for the consumers as well as have lower financing costs, and it's available basically globally to anybody with an internet connection.
Cool. Sounds interesting. I guess maybe just following on that, Greg, like what was the biggest challenge to kind of put those assets on chain that DMM ran into?
Yes, it's a great question because we're kind of bridging these two worlds and they're not necessarily the easiest to play together with. So our approach really was to put forth use cases. So we really spent a lot of time, and we got Tim Draper and the Draper guys were involved over more than a year ago when we started to build this out. And the idea was actually we would build it and then show it to the community and see what they thought. So actually, when you convert your crypto into and use the WOM protocol, you convert them into M tokens, and we've seen just in since March actually a 27,000% growth, and all organically in the use of these tokens. And the biggest thing we had was when you're looking at the real world assets, you need to have a lot of different data points, and they need to be from trusted third parties, right? So that's something you need somebody else to do, and this is the reason we started working with Sergey and Johan, the whole team over there, very early on, to develop this framework around it. Because our idea is, if you look at it, we have an explorer, and you actually see all the underlying assets. You see the liens, you see all the information. So if you look at the traditional system, all that information is opaque. You never get to see it. So here you're able to generate higher yields. So the DMM, the DeFi money market account, is about 5 times better than the average, traditional money market account. But you also have the benefit of seeing actually how these things are being generated and how it's backed. So I think that we're at the very beginnings of what's a very large trend, I believe, in kind of melding these two worlds.
Cool. Yeah, I guess if we could just kind of hit on the same point, like Ray, for CurioInvest, what did it take to kind of get the cars on chain, if you will, and what was the biggest hurdle you had to get over to do that?
Yeah, so Curio has been advocating the asset tokenization topic here in Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and over the last months, we became pretty much the first issuer who got the prospectus approved by the regulator that was directly collateralized and backed by the real asset. So in a way, by having the real asset wrapped with a security, we managed to issue a public sale that represents essentially this particular token, this particular asset. In this case, we subscribed a $1.1 million Ferrari F12 TDF, a collectible, 1 out of 799. And the idea is here essentially to have this kind of setup that enable us to replicate this legal wrap to different assets, and afterwards essentially enable investors to have a direct link to these assets by having a token that represents each asset. And when it comes together with the valuation and so on, then we use, of course, the Chainlink price feeder to gather different APIs of the particular asset, let's say in this case the Ferrari, and essentially bring kind of a real-time or an independent price. So you, for the first time, have on the one hand a token that represents the real asset, and in a way gets you can trade it on stock exchanges, and there are a few as we speak, but you also have this real-time independent price feed. And this enables us, as we frequently mentioned in the past, very novel new cases. We see the asset tokenization of an asset itself, not the end point, but the starting point. And in Aroma, we have very exciting projects that work around the DAO concept and stablecoin, rebalancing kind of the vaults with these assets and using this independent price feed as a tool to acquire or sell those underlying tokens.
Which car is going to appreciate the most over the next 10 years?
Yes,
make and model.
When you look at collectible assets, you see that they share similar properties such as the scarcity, some of them provenance, and so on. When you look at classic cars, particularly coming from those that maybe were exhibited at different galleries or events, maybe races that were owned by famous people, you see that there's a few that share kind of that pedigree. When you're looking at, the Ferrari index shown by Haggerty, that includes top 20 cars and so on. And I guess one cannot say the future, but you can already get the feeling about what's going on there in this collectible sector.
But if you had to pick just one,
what's
the go-to? Ferrari?
I would then certainly go for Ferrari. What you see here today, the brand is capturing a significant market share, and you see that the assets have hit, actions and a few other trades, and you see in a way records starting with the GTO out there and many other ones.
All right, cool. Yeah, I guess moving on to Teller a little bit. When we say credit scores are on-chain, I can understand easily how that means that people that interact with the chain in making the credit decisions can see the credit score. But part of like a credit score is sort of, or part of just issuing credit is what happens when they don't pay. Like how does Teller approach that problem?
Yeah, so I think there's two worlds here. The first being your credit score is not actually on-chain. So we've situated our protocol in 3 different ways. First, we have data providers that feed in the actual information. And it's very focused on the consumer. The consumer is the borrower in this case. So the borrower will request their credit or request their bank transactions from a data provider. That's hooked up into the protocol. So let's say they get their actual FICO score or they get their bank transactions for the last 60 days. They then submit that to our second world, which is this kind of layer 2 cloud distributed node like ecosystem that actually runs a credit assessment algorithm. So it feeds in the data. So an example is your balance for the past 60 days. It takes the lowest balance and it does a loan to balance to debt ratio and says based on the balance to debt, we can actually calculate the interest rate that this borrower should amass. So based on the algorithm itself, it spits out the loan terms, and that is the only thing that's written on chain. We've done this very strategically because users definitely do not want credit scores attributed on chain, and really almost all financial data should be protected, and it should be made private. So the only thing that's written on chain and mapped to an ETH address is the actual interest rate that's charged to the loan, the amount of the loan, and like the collateral types essentially, or the asset. The second kind of world in answering that question is once an actual loan is outstanding, how do you prevent someone from just running away with the money? So at onset, we've taken a pretty conservative approach in allowing specific whitelisted DeFi applications for that loan to be used within. So at the start, the loan is held within pretty much just a smart contract wallet that the user can then go use on Aave, on Compound, on Uniswap, DYDX. And we have different parameters built within that based on how unsecured you are, what your use cases are of that loan specifically. Expanding past that, we've actually already had a partnership with a third-party debt collector here in San Francisco that if the borrower does default, there is real recourse as there would be in the traditional sense.
All right. Well, I think it's probably better than my idea of putting everyone's information on chain to not do that.
Would you use that?
Yeah, I don't think that would be dicey. That would be dicey, I think, from a regulatory perspective.
Yeah, also just like a mob developing and killing you perspective too. Terrible. Okay, so I guess on to maybe the most anticipated part of the panel. Melanie, how does WOM use Chainlink?
Well, we are using the price feed of Chainlink, provided already in a couple of applications that have integrated the WOM protocol. These applications are kind of social networks or publishing platforms where content creators are creating exactly this kind of content, honest, authentic product recommendations. And of course, the platforms who are monetizing with this kind of content instead of advertising, and the creators who are creating the content want to know the right price, the trusted price for our token, for the WOM token. And so Chainlink is providing this trusted information to the users of these platforms. We have already a couple of 100,000 users on these platforms. So we see already the WOM protocol is tested live. We still, of course, are improving it over the next years. And but it's great to see that especially young people who are using these applications are already seeing the price feed every day and are earning WOM based on the given price.
Cool. Yeah, Greg, how's DeFi money market integrated with Chainlink?
Yeah, so we use Chainlink in a variety of ways, but it's basically because we're using these real world assets. It's an essential kind of glue to our ecosystem. So we always use the price feeds to get the information off, how USDC, ETH, everything is performing. But more importantly, because we have, and I'll take the example of actually aviation, which is almost, the Chainlink team's almost done with this, so we can introduce aviation as an asset class. We did cars previously. We need third-party data feeds of valuation, right? And valuation is updated. So, for example, in the case of cars, we had Black Book. Black Book is kind of like this go-to. If you go to a dealership in the United States, they're evaluating everything Black Book. So with the cars, we actually set up these data feeds through Chainlink so that we could have real-time access to kind of the data and valuation. And then we'll also have feeds regarding how the actual liens and lien documents are and whether they're changed or not. And as the portfolio as a whole changes, it's also calculating debt ceilings and other items, right, to kind of keep the ecosystem balanced. DMM is a little different in the fact that we have a fixed amount of DMG, these governance coins. And there's not going to be any more, but the ecosystem itself is balanced, that we couldn't have like $1 billion overnight, because they would eventually need to work its way into a real world asset. So there's either 3 states in the DeFi money market system. You could have traditional crypto, so USDC, DAI, whatever you'd like. Then you could have it go into fiat briefly, and then it has to come into a real world asset. So in the process of it into a real world assets, it's all tracked using Chainlink. And the additional component we're starting to work on is to track all the fiat flows with Chainlink, as well as how everything's performing. So this is kind of the next item we're working with right after aviation and real estate.
Sounds good. Ray, how's Curio integrated with Chainlink?
Yeah, so the way it's working is we're launching, now that we listed now that we finalized the token sale for the Ferrari, and we're planning to list this Ferrari token in different exchanges. The idea is to provide this kind of independent price link for customers to know whether they're trading at a premium or a discount. And once customers become more aware, we expect to have additional liquidity on the asset, and of course, more people would know when to trade. This is the first step. The second step is going forward, we're planning to build this algorithmic stable coin that rebalances their vaults based on the real assets. So basically, by having users access to these vaults, they can essentially capture, store their car token into the vault and get a loan based on that car token, and the algorithm would then be linked to the Chainlink in order to get that pricing and know how many tokens it will be required to collateralize that loan.
That makes sense. Then moving on to Ryan, a little bit more suspicious of a case. Looking over the Towler Finance website, I see Framework Ventures listed as a backer. They're primarily known as Chainlink fanboys who also make investments. But I don't see Chainlink listed anywhere.
So we are keeping kind of our partnerships under wrap as we come to make a lot of announcements in the upcoming month. But from a high level, our world with Chainlink is surrounding that of credit. And I think there's a really interesting play here that makes it composable with something like Ray's working on at Curio and Greg at DMM. So this concept of credit is just trust in the traditional world. And that's how it relates back to assets like real estate or cars. And it really is this cornerstone of the centralized world, but it's become kind of concentrated into a couple entities. And in the States, we look at the big 3 who concentrate FICO, TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. These companies today, they're fallible, they're insecure. We just had a huge data breach with Equifax, I believe last year or the year before. And because of that, we want to make a more open system and utilizing Chainlink to deliver this. For us, it's first bringing unsecured loans to DeFi. And that's just a result of bridging like CeFi, this traditional world, with DeFi, or we call it fintech really. But the credit bureaus of today is something that we can see evolving into something bigger in the DeFi space as a larger type of distributed credit bureau in our blockchain world. So long term, we can enable this creation of a new system of trust. That's less scalable, less subject to manipulation. And I can't reveal too much, but this is the tip of the spear for the work we're already doing with Chainlink.
All right. So I guess when we're talking about kind of composability in DeFi, especially kind of if we're thinking about maybe a long tail of oracles, is anyone willing to discuss whether it makes sense for Chainlink to be its own blockchain?
Very interesting. Well, it is Bitcoin, ETH, and Link right now, really heating up CoinMarketCap. So I think we're seeing this new world of Chainlink leading this idea that security is the next most important thing that's needed. And I think because of the security world, it doesn't necessarily have to. In its own sense, each Oracle provider to date is expandable and composable because Chainlink is situated at the onset on Ethereum, but each Oracle can provide an actual API feed to one smart contract, or you could have many Oracles providing it to a smart contract as an aggregator. I think the composability of Chainlink would be limited if we introduce an actual distributed blockchain set. And it could potentially increase the security vulnerabilities that are solved by having each node being individualized. Something that I think brings it back, as you kind of talk about the long tail of oracles, is what DMM is working on in terms of this constant feedback loop that they're receiving from the loans themselves and the real world assets. This is something where I think is really interesting in composability that kind of plugs into this world of ongoing credit that we're working on. I think something that comes into the Chainlink ecosystem, and you have this almost like ongoing evaluation of credit from real world assets that I'm not sure if Chainlink being its own blockchain really helps to solve this long tail, the issue with that and the specifics of some of these like really interesting nuances of loans and new types of data feeds that can be plugged in as it is today as its own security network.
I guess we'll see what happens.
But open.
Melanie, do you want to comment on that at all? No.
Well, I'm also with Ryan here, and I think there are we have seen great partnerships, Chainlink, Polkadot, etc. I mean, there are so many great solutions out there, but of course, never say never. I think you are in a very, very good space, delivering already so many trusted Oracle technology sets, and there are so many more that are needed in the future. That's also why we are so keen. Of course, the price feed was something easy to get started, but we are so keen to work with you guys or with Chainlink on performance data oracles, how to bring trust into the media, the publishing space, what content is actually really viewed for how long, and all these. There are so many oracles needed to help us all these projects to really get slowly to decentralization. And to bridge this gap between off-chain and on-chain, and I would say keep focus.
I think it's interesting, sort of like how will like the topology of like a mini chains world, how will it develop, and like what will be the most efficient ways for projects to self-organize. I guess a question for Greg. So if we're talking about real-world assets and users holding tokens, what sort of claims on the underlying assets or claims on the cash flows or guarantees does a DMM, someone earning the 6.25% interest, what type of claims do they have that like on the underlying assets and those cash flows?
Yeah, you hit up on a great point, right? So if you're, 6.25% is a great return in today's environment, and the Fed, as most people probably saw, just announced that sounds like they're never raising interest rates again. So we think this is going to be here for a while. So I think if you look at when I described what's the essential components to introduce an asset into the ecosystem. So one, first lien senior secured position. Again, so the asset will be taken away if it's not paid. And because it is over collateralized, actually in the DMM ecosystem, if they don't pay, you would likely make more money, believe it or not, because they're highly over collateralized and the interest payments are over collateralized. So there's contractual relationships that DMM ecosystem holders have on kind of a global basis against these assets, and they have the rights to all these asset flows. And that's why if you look at it from a perspective from kind of predictability of kind of very stable uncorrelated yield, hard to do without having those three elements as a requirement, I think, in the ecosystem. And that's one of the reasons we set them very early on. And I think those requirements maybe vary by country, et cetera, as we go forward. But I think they're really good building blocks because you can't go too far astray, which is one of the key elements to this, right?
Cool. Yeah, that sounds smart. Yeah, I think we're getting like kind of at the end of the time here now. And I just wanted to say a quick thank you to both SmartCon and Chainlink for supporting our work at DeFi Pulse and F Gas Station. And if you go to either of those websites right now, I think you'll see a big old Chainlink related banner on them. And yeah, we definitely appreciate their contributions to the community and us. And thank you to all the guests for explaining what y'all doing.
Thank you.